Testing. Test. Yo. What's up? Brah. We're getting started. All right, nice. And Emily says that audio's coming through and video's coming through over there on Victoria. What's up? It's your boy coming at you with yet another lecture. This stuff keeps coming. Honestly, I just keep dropping new hits. What is it? What am I, Gucci Mane? Just new hot tracks every week. Get hyped. Today's a big day. Today's honestly a wild day. I know that last week with the TCP stuff, some of it got a little confusing. So I'm actually going to start a little bit with very, very late review. Right? Very late review. And then we're going to hop into today's big meal. I hope you brought your bibs. This is very much the lobster dinner of web dev lectures. First of all, how are y'all doing? Doing good? Doing good? All right. Yeah, I scared you? No, it's gonna be great. Like, I hope you're feeling just ready to dive into this. It's gonna be a delicious meal. There's like 4 courses. There's an opening kind of sip of, I don't know. This is just very good. Anyways, this week you start a brand new project. Brand new project. This is your first big project. This is the first project that spans multiple days and ends up with something kind of visual, something rewarding. Anybody know what project that is? Tiny App. The whispers start. Just wait, is it Tiny App? I think it might be Tiny App. It's a URL shortener. What? That's right. That's right. Sometimes I look at Victoria and say, that's right. You're going to be working on Tiny App. It's going to be a good time. Here's a heads up. Tiny App, not an easy project. No, okay. Let's just say Tiny App. It isn't going to be the best time you've ever had. Like this, I fully expect you to hate like most of the days. But when you come out of Tiny App, you're gonna have like traps and lats and just ready. You're gonna be ready to take on absolutely anything. I'm serious. I've seen people go through Tiny App so many times. I've seen, like 150 students or something at this point. I've seen a lot of people out there, and you see it when you're walking on the street. You see someone, you're like, that person go to Lighthouse? They look a little just hard on the inside. Do those eyes not reflect as much light as other people's eyes? So I do want to be very upfront. Tiny App supposed to be pretty frustrating. If you find yourself kind of questioning yourself and maybe everything that you stand for, like that's totally okay. Please come talk to me, talk to Travis, Davey, talk to Carl over there, talk to literally anyone, right? Just kind of corner us and go like, I don't think I could do this, and we'll be like, you can though. It's okay. Like you'll be fine. I tell everyone I feel like, I don't know if you ever look up like is tinfoil hat people. This is me. Except most tinfoil hat people are like, the world's gonna end. It's the end of the world. I'm like, they're all like, you don't know how bad it's gonna be. I'm sort of the opposite. I'm like a saran wrap head person. I'm like, you don't know how okay you're gonna be. It's gonna be so okay. And no one ever believes me. So you're gonna be fine. All right, I know that was like a long spiel about how okay you're gonna be. It's gonna be great. Again, please do reach out if you're having any trouble with it. I also want to say the Tiny App has been designed to be frustrating. So if it feels frustrating, then you're doing it right. Like, you're honestly doing it great. We'll talk more about that at the end of the lecture. I'll give you a, I don't know, speech or something. But for now, we're going to hop right into learning some stuff. All right, I'm going to start with a blank kind of project, or a blank folder, just to show you I'm not really starting with anything. Notes.md, we're going to write some stuff. First thing to write, date. What day is it today? You don't even know anymore. It's September 30th. Anybody here a metalhead? Yeah, are you going to Corpiclani tonight? Oh man, just Corpiclani and Alluvietti are playing tonight. And then, you into a Monomarth? Oh yeah, you are. Did you go to the show the other night? Yeah? Okay, so a Monomarth, the reason I'm pointing this out is because today's lecture is going to be a Monomarth themed. So Monomarth is a Swedish Viking-themed death metal band. So I've been into a Monomarth since like the 9th grade. Monomarth has been around since 1992. This stuff is amazing. If you need anything to kind of get you in the mood for coding, it's a Monomarth, right? Featuring hits such as Twilight of the Thunder God, The Fate of Norns, Prediction of Warfare. I mean, how can you not like these guys? So I went to this show, and I think we're gonna make a website about a Monomarth, like a fan site, and then I'll send it to them. I went to the show. I had never been in a mosh pit like this before. The most violent thing I've ever experienced. It was incredible. They brought out like an inflatable snake and everything. It was great. So today is week 3, day 1. Tiny app kickoff / servers 101 / a Monomarth. That's what we're going to be working on. So I'll kind of lay the basic theme of today's lecture out right off the bat. Today, we will be learning about servers, right? You're like, what? But we talked about servers already. In fact, we had a lecture together about servers. What kind of servers were those? That? Yeah, sure, web servers. Web servers that spoke what kind of protocol? What's that? No, we didn't talk, well, I said HTTP, but we made TCP servers. Hey, you remember the chat thing? That was a TCP server. In fact, today we're going to see the strict difference between TCP and HTTP. This was something I had to kind of gloss over last time. Okay? We're really going to be spending quite a bit of time on today. So TCP, so we're going to be learning about HTTP servers specifically. Right? TCP is something we talked about last week. Right? And TCP was a protocol for just talking on a wire between two people. Right? If I had agent A and agent B, they were able to just shout at each other. Right? And there weren't very many rules about how they were able to talk to each other. The only rule was shout down the wire. Right? So if this person here was to connect and start shouting, then this person here would hear. Right? And if this person here was to shout back, then this person here would be able to listen to that. Right? And that's how we could get two separate systems to talk to each other across the network. It was cool. Very few rules. Very few rules on this. Now, I said that like, as we come up with our stack of protocols, right? As we come up with a stack of protocols, depending on the kind of thing that we want to transfer back and forth, we might want to come up with strict rules about how you're able to communicate with each other. Right? I don't need you to be amazing at understanding this stuff. Right? You just need to know that TCP is down here, and there's going to be something else up here that tells you how you can use TCP. Right? How are you allowed to use TCP? So with TCP, we have something called full duplex. Right? Full duplex. Sounds like a WWE move. Macho Man Randy Savage with the full duplex. No. Full duplex just means you're able to talk this way, and you're also able to talk this way at the same time. And that's what it's going to be. This is neat, but it kind of introduces a bunch of problems. One of the first problems is that maybe sometimes A does not want to listen to B. Right? I just want to be connected. I want to hold hands, but I just don't want to listen to you. Right? Like that's what A and B might have as their kind of situation right now. And a full duplex thing is kind of frustrating because B can then just keep spamming A with stuff. Okay? Maybe that's one of the problems. So we might put on this some rules that say, hey, you know what? When A and B are connected, right? And I'm always going to say that A here for my demos, A is going to be the client and B is going to be the server. When we were talking about TCP, there wasn't really much of a distinction between the client and the server because they could both talk to each other anytime. The real distinction was that like a client can connect to a server. So a server might have many clients connected. And here in HTTP, we're going to have that same idea where a client connects to a server, and there may be many clients connected to a particular server. But one of the distinctions with HTTP that we're going to see today is that the server is only allowed to talk to the client when the client asks. Okay? When the client asks. So I think that you actually did a little bit of HTTP stuff last week, correct? Did you make some kind of like did you do the space station thing? You know, so you were working with HTTP. I find the space station thing is pretty cool, right? But there's some stuff that goes over people's heads, right? So when you were doing the space station exercise, on which side of this client-server relation would you put yourself on? You're the client because you were requesting some data, right? And I actually really want to focus on that particular word, is that the client requests, right? The client requests, and that's going to be central to just the role that the client plays in this transaction. If the client requests, then the server responds, right? If you want proof, that this is the way it is, look at how those letters line up. Look at that. Tide goes in, tide goes out, client request, server response. These things line up. You can't explain that. So the client is going to request stuff, the server is going to respond with either the particular things that the client asked for, or it's going to respond and say, hey, you know what, you don't have access to that. Or it's going to respond and say, hey, you know what, I just don't have that. Right? Or, hey, you know what, your request was poorly formed. Right? They might say stuff like that. So we're going to put ourselves in the shoes of both the client and the server today as we design a web server. OK. Can I just say that that is everything that you need to know about TCP? Right? To be a web developer, look at that, no code. You just need to know this picture. TCP, if you've got an A and a B, they can talk to each other. Right? If you really want to learn how to use TCP, by all means, power to you. Right? Spend a weekend. Right? But it's not the point of being a web developer. And HTTP, on the other hand, boy, you better get ready to tattoo this stuff on your. You know how people have like infinity signs on their wrists? This is going to be a client-server response. That's what this is going to be. So what I'm going to do is similar to what we did last week. I'm going to get us to think about the code that we would want to write to be able to make an HTTP server. Right? So we're going to think about the code that we want to write. We're likely going to come up with very similar code to some real implementations. And we're going to spend the first half of the lecture working with a tool that you'll never be using again. Right? I'll be upfront with that. The first half of this lecture is going to use a particular tool called HTTP server. And Useless. And you'll see why. Very good for education, useless for work. And then the second half, part 2 out of 2, in that one we're going to use a thing called Express. Right? Express you are going to be using in the program. Express you probably will be using at work. If you go work somewhere that uses Node, right? You'll likely be using Express. Want to be upfront. This is not going to be a tutorial on how to make a giant website with Express. This is going to be like a kickoff point, and you'll learn a lot through these assignments. Right? But I do want you to ask questions to clarify any misunderstandings. Right? Just want to set expectations. Right? So, like I said, in the first half here, we're going to do some brainstorming, and then we'll be working with HTTP serving. So here's the purpose for why I want to brainstorm. I'm going to set out why we even need an HTTP server in the first place. Right? If I want a web page, who has that web page? Who has google.com? Who owns that? Right, some registrar might own the name google.com, but I'm thinking more of this. If I go to google.com, who has this picture? Who has this stuff here? Who has the I'm feeling lucky button? Where does that live? Does it live on my machine? It doesn't live on my machine. Right? I don't have the entire internet stored on my machine. And so where does that thing live? It lives on a server somewhere, right? On a server somewhere, and that server is likely owned by Google. Right? And I want to be able to contact Google and ask specifically for pages. Right? Most of the time when you're surfing the internet, right, you're asking for HTML pages. We'll start very basic. Right? I just want a page that shows me all the content that I want to see. Now, if I was to draw this out, again, very similar to our A-B situation here. This is Nima, and here's Google, right? And one of these needs to connect to the other, right? So right off the bat, I say, OK, well, I want to connect to Google. I don't really want Google to connect to me. So I'm going to say that to myself and say, hey, you know what? I'm the client. This here is the server. And Google has a bunch of things that I want. Google, what kind of stuff does Google have? Google has all kinds of information, right? So Google might have things like search results. Okay, Google might have pictures. Right? Google might have HTML pages. Right? Where an HTML page is the thing that loads up on my browser. And we'll be spending quite some time on that today. But Google has a bunch of this stuff, and I want to get that over to me. For example, Google has several HTML pages. It might have the main page. It might have a search results page. Right? It might also have an about page, right? Or an FAQ page. Right? All this different stuff that doesn't live on my end. And what I want to do is I want to request to receive that stuff. I want to say, hey, Google, can you please give me the main HTML page? Right? Now, if we've established that TCP is the way that things are connected, right, and we put some rules on how we use TCP, I can come up with the way that Nima is supposed to ask Google for this stuff. Like, I'm only allowed to ask Google for things using particular words. Now, I know you've already started seeing these, but we're going to do a little bit of an overview. And in HTTP, there are things called verbs. Right? Have you seen HTTP verbs before? Can someone give me an example of a verb? Get. Right? So get is a verb. Right? What's another verb? Post. Right? What else? Put. Right? Get, post, put. There's one that says delete. Right? There's a bunch of other ones. These are the only ones that we're really going to care about in boot camp. Get, post, put, delete. To be honest, they're really the only ones you end up caring about as a web developer in general. Right? There are other ones, but don't get used very often. Now, get, post, put, delete. These are words that just a bunch of nerds came up with, put them in a document, and then they said, hey, you know what? These are the ways that we're going to format our TCP requests. We're going to say, hey, I want to get something. And that's really important. HTTP is going to be about resources. Right? I want to get the main page. And so I might say that Nima says, I want to get the main page. Right? And I make that request, and what happens to Nima after Nima makes that request? Right? I want to get the main page. I just listen. I just wait. Right? I wait for a response. And I want to get the main page. And then eventually Google says, here you go. And then they also give me back some data. Right? Just some data. And that's also going to be important, is that the way that Google is going to be responding to me, right, is usually some, if they found the data, it's going to be some acknowledgement so that I know that I've gotten that stuff, and then also the data that I asked for. And it doesn't make any sense if I say, hey, can I have the main page? And Google says, I don't know, can you? And then just leaves it at that. Like, I need the data back. So we're going to start coding this up. So over on the server side, what we're saying is that the server needs to listen. And it needs to listen for particular requests. And just right off the bat, what do you think this code is going to look like? No wrong answers. There's going to be some request? Sure, what's that going to look like? It's going to have the word get. Right, so here we're going to say that this is the server code. It's going to have the word get. Right, what else? Let's imagine that the server wants to listen for when somebody makes a get to the main page. And then I want it to return the main page. What do we imagine this is going to look like? Going to have the word listen somewhere, yeah? So listen. So here, we'll list out the requirements a bit more explicitly. I want to listen for get requests to /main, then return main.html. We'll say that that's what we want this to do. And again, this is up to you to decide how you might want to structure this code. You got an idea there? No? Are there always going to be GET requests? Right? As soon as I turn on the server, is there immediately a GET request coming in? Probably not. Right? Probably not. So we might have to wait for a GET request. Right? It might have to be a thing that we wait for. Right? What kind of word do we use for that? Right, listen, exactly. But what construct is used for when something might not be happening immediately? There's an asynchronous thing. So what's that? On? Yeah, we could totally say something like listen dot maybe on, right? Or when there's an event. Right? Again, this isn't real code, right? You're coming up with the way that you might want to structure this. Right? And I want to listen for a particular thing. What do I want to listen for? I want to listen for a GET request. Maybe, sure. GET request. And what should this GET request be to? What's that? Right. I could even write this out. GET request to main page. Maybe that's how you decide to write it. Or maybe you might want to do something like get to /main. Right? And what do I want to do when there is this GET request? I want to create a response. Right? So if I'm saying that I will want to create a response when I get a GET request, right? And you use the word async here. Right? Anthony said async. What is the thing that we tend to use when we're dealing with something that's asynchronous? A callback. Right? So I might pass to this a callback. Because I'm saying, hey, you know what? I don't want you to do this action right now. I want you to do this action when you get a GET request to /main. Right? And the thing that I want to do, you said I want to send a response. So maybe in here I might go, OK, response.send. Right? And I'm going to imagine that I have the main.html page. Right? Again, this is not real code. This is not real code, but I'm trying to get you to think about how we might take a sentence like this, listen for GET request to /main, then return main HTML. I'm trying to think of how syntactically we might structure something like that in JavaScript. Right? This is important because you're not just going to be making JavaScript servers in your life. Right? Later on in the program, you'll be making servers using Ruby. Right? Ruby is going to have a different syntax for stuff. Right? Ruby does not make such a use of like callbacks in this particular way. Right? It just doesn't. Right? It has different constructs. Right? But if we understand the language itself, which is separate from HTTP, it's separate from all that stuff, right? And then we understand HTTP, you may be able to bridge those two things together. And does anyone have any questions about this thing right now? Right? Again, this isn't real code. There's no such thing as the listen.on function at the moment. Right? But conceptually, does this process make sense? Okay. Does this confuse anyone like more than before? Cool. I want you to keep this in mind, right? Because this is going to be very, very close to the code that we end up with in the second half of the lecture. Right? Very, very close. Actually, if I was to tell you that this was supposed to be real code, right? And we look at this line here, what is something that immediately jumps out at you? Right? Maybe not immediately, but when you stare at it for a while, what is something that jumps out to you as a problem? Right? Thinking JavaScript. Here, let me make this a little bit more explicit. Const, maybe listen, equals require listen. All right, let's imagine that the listen function is in scope. What is not in scope in the 4 lines of code that I have here? Response. Right? Response is not in scope. So we might have to find some way to deal with that. Right? What is one way to maybe deal with this? I might want to declare it globally or something like that. Right? Another thing that I could do, right, is maybe make the response a parameter to this callback, where I imagine that whatever listen.on is, it's going to handle the response. It's going to handle giving me a response. And again, this is something we're going to iterate over like 4 or 5 times. Right? So right now it should be a little confusing, but I want you to at least start going down the trail of when you have a problem, start imagining how you might solve that. Right? Put yourself in the shoes of designing these tools. Right? I find that personally, when I put myself in the motivation spot, right, in the motivation spot of like, why does this thing exist? What problem does it solve, and how would I solve it? I usually get a much better understanding of the design of the actual tool. Right? You're going to be learning a lot of frameworks over the course of boot camp. You can approach this stuff in 2 ways. One way you can approach it is to just learn and just pick this stuff up and go like, OK, I'm just going to remember that this is the syntax it's going to be. Right? You're going to find is you won't be able to keep up. Right? Like it is impossible to cram your head full of that stuff this quickly. Right? When you get to jQuery next week, right? Or when you get to React 2 weeks afterwards. Instead, the scalable way to do things, right, is to develop the skills of thinking about how you might build this, right, and then you'll notice patterns that the designers of these libraries have picked. Cool? Again, give that a thought for the next couple weeks, and you'll see what I mean. So we're going to hop into actually writing some code right now. I'm going to make a folder. I'm going to call this HTTP demo 1. Creative name. And I'm going to write some code. I'm going to start off by making a file called server.js. Here's server.js. I write code. Save. Programmer. Nice. Hacker man. This is beautiful, perfect code. There is no... Does anyone see any bugs in this code? None. This is pristine. Pristine. Right? And I'm not just being funny. I'm saying that, like, immediately, as soon as I start writing code, right, I'm introducing bugs. The only time that bugs enter your program is when your hands are on the keyboard. Right? So you want to minimize that time. As soon as your hands are tainted. Like, all they do is they spew out mostly bugs. Right? You know where you can't have bugs is on a notebook or on a whiteboard. Right? That stuff is that's not in production. Right? So you can whiteboard stuff out as much as possible. I'm not going to do that today because the whiteboard doesn't come out on the camera very well. But I do want you to keep that in mind. Right? Plan a lot, and then specifically write very little. You're going to write very little at a time. I wrote absolutely nothing. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to localhost, I don't know, pick a number, 3000. I go enter. Sweet. Surprise, surprise, site can't be reached. Right, it's because I forgot to run my program, of course. I'm going to go node. Wait, actually, let's cd into it. Node server.js. We'll have this running. Now I'm going to go, whew, still broken. Right? This is fine. I cause little problems for myself, right, and then I tackle them one by one. So for the first part here, right, I'm going to take us through some code that I already know. Right? Like, I already have this stuff. And like I said, this isn't code that you're going to be writing for your assignments. Actually, that's a lie. I think you start off by writing a little bit of this just as a tiny demo, but it's not code that you're going to be writing for your project. And it's like the first, I think it's the first assignment or so you kind of play with this. And here's what I'm going to do. Const HTTP equals require HTTP. You've played with this module before or something similar. Right? What did you play with? This is what you played with request. Did you play with the HTTPS module at all? No? I think we just took that out of the curriculum. Like, I think we might have just taken that assignment out. So the HTTP module is just a module in Node that's going to give me access to a bunch of HTTP things. Right? A bunch of HTTP things. Very similar to the request module, but it's going to be very generic. And you'll see what I mean in a sec. I ran my program just to console log what HTTP is. I encourage you to do this. What's in here? Just a bunch of stuff. Right? What kind of thing is this, the thing that I console logged? It's an object, meaning we can access the stuff inside of this object, right? Using dot notation or using square bracket notation. What's in here? There's this thing called a server. Ooh, what? A client request. Ooh, what are these? Maybe error messages. These are numbers associated with words, right? What do we call these kinds of things? So this is definitely a key, and this is definitely a value. But have you ever seen, for example, we'll do this one, 404 not found? What is that? This is an error code, right? I'm going to start using the word status code, right? Because some of these are not bad, right? Errors are bad, but this one's just OK. Right? OK. Right? 202 accepted. Right? So this is something I kind of neglected to put in here, is when we're talking about HTTP, when Google says, here you go, right, this is technically made up of a status code, right, and generally some response data. Right? The status code is going to be something like 200, 404, 500. We're going to be exploring what the structure of the status of the response and the request are going to look like as we kind of go through this. So inside of the HTTP module, one of the things that I have is this function called create server. If I was to scroll through enough, you'd find it eventually. Right? It's HTTP create server. And I run this, and I go node server, and oh, I made a server, and then it disappeared. Right? Here's another. I'm just making servers. But I'm noticing that my program isn't hanging. Right? It's not hanging because I never told my server to listen. Right? So evidently, when you create a server, this spawns a server that isn't listening yet. So I need to tell this server to listen. How might I do that? I'm going to do http.listen. That's a good idea. So maybe http.listen. We're going to find that actually .listen, that's the perfect word for it. That's going to be the name of the function. But we're not doing this in the proper place. So http.listen is not a function. Right? Now, I want you to know here, when I say http.listen, what does HTTP refer to? It refers to the library. But I don't want to tell the library to listen. I want to tell the server to listen. Right? How do I tell the server to listen? What's that? I might have to name the server first or save it, at least in a variable. Right? Because what I'm seeing here is as soon as the server is made, it's not being caught anywhere. So I might go something like const server equals, and then I save the server itself. Because then what I'm going to see is I am able to say server.listen. Right? That's important. I want to hold on to the particular server value. Right? It can be very tempting when you start coding web stuff, or really when you start coding anything using libraries, to forget that what you're dealing with is still JavaScript. Right? And people start kind of thinking that there's like magic in here. There isn't. Right? These are JavaScript values like any other. In fact, I'm going to see that if I was to console log what server is, right, I'm going to see that what comes out is something. What kind of thing came out of there? An object. Right? I got an object out. So again, I do really encourage you to console log this stuff, right, and take yourself through the process of thinking, what JavaScript thing is this? Right? And it'll make debugging stuff or understanding this stuff a lot simpler, as opposed to putting yourself in the mindset of like, I'm dealing with this gigantic library, or I'm dealing with these functions that I don't understand. Because that's a very good way to get quickly overwhelmed. So I'm going to go server.listen. And right there, we've now got a server that is listening, and my thing's just kind of hanging. Now, if I was to go to localhost 3000, right, I still can't reach the site. Still not reaching anything. Why is that? Yeah, I didn't tell the server what port to listen to. Evidently, the server is probably listening on some port. I don't know. I don't know what port it's listening on. I would need to look into the documentation to find out what the default port is. Right? But I can specify a port. So I'm going to go listen on port 3000. One of the things that I also have when you do server listen is you can also pass it a callback. And the callback is really just used to say something like, I am listening on 3000. It's just a function that you can run after it starts listening so that you know it succeeded. So now when I run, it'll say, I am listening on 3000. And I'm going to find that when I go to localhost 3000, keep your eye trained on here. Boop. Now this still says this site cannot be reached, but I'm going to notice that that's not actually the current page. What? what? No, come back. There you go. Something's happening, right? Something's happening. I'm making a request. I'm making a request to localhost 3000, right? And apparently, it's connected somewhere. And we've said that with HTTP, the transaction is that a client makes a request, and the server sends a response. Right? Request, response. As soon as somebody asks you what HTTP is, you should say request, response. That's all HTTP is. Make a request, you get a response back. Meaning that if I make a request and a response has not been sent back, that transaction is not over. Right? HTTP is a transactional protocol. And send something, I get something. And this is good. Okay, we know that we're connecting now. And I know that over on my side here, I have not written any code that says send back a response. I don't have any of that. So that might be something I want to start working on now. Have y'all seen NodeMon up to now? Have you seen what NodeMon is before? OK, so there is a specific thing. You're going to notice that every time I make changes to my server, I have to stop and restart my server. And that just becomes really annoying, right, to constantly have to do that. So there is a program called NodeMon. It kind of looks like, no, daemon? No. And you can run NodeMon either by installing it or by running npx NodeMon. So that's what I'm going to be doing. I'm going to run npx NodeMon, and then you get to say the name of the file that you want to run. You can kind of imagine that I was running node server, but I'm going to be running npx NodeMon server. Right? And what this does is anytime I make a change to the server, it'll just restart the server. Right? That way you don't have to like watch me stop and start, stop and start, stop and start all the time. This takes a second to start up, but then it'll be good. There we go. And now it says, oh, I'm watching this directory. I'm starting on node server.js. And you're going to see that if I made some changes to the code, so say I change this thing to say, hey, yo, listening on 3000. NodeMon will restart itself. Right, pretty neat. So I'm just going to keep my server running. Taking us back to what we were doing earlier, if I was making this connection and I'm seeing that it's hanging, I want to write some code that says respond. We actually had to do something very similar to this when we made the TCP server last week. Right? We have to say when we receive some data, or when we get somebody connecting. Right? I'm going to do something similar. I'm going to say server, and I'm going to say something like when somebody sends me a message. Right? So you know, it's really funny. I'm blanking right now on the syntax, so we get to go look it up. We're going to go HTTP, create server, and honestly, I might even look up something like an example, right, to take myself through what the code for this might look like. Here's W3 schools, should be fine. You can take yourselves to an example. And right, that's right, I lost myself. So as I said, this HTTP module, you don't actually end up using it, and you're going to see why. Our code's going to get very messy, and I want to be very upfront that the code's going to stop making sense pretty quickly. Right? So I'm going to keep this demo fairly short from now until, I think, likely 11:05 or so. Here's some code in this example that I've looked up online. Can somebody take me through what this might do at the moment? Mm-hmm. 808 is the port. Yeah, so for Victoria, Lizzie said 200 as a status code, maybe OK, right? Anthony said this is the port. Maybe we're listening on 8080, right? But one of the things that's interesting about this is this has a slightly different situation going on than what I have. We're going to get rid of the listen. Okay? And Graham, sorry, I didn't notice what you wrote in Slack, but you're 100% correct with the assigning a server to a variable. But since we're doing that, then we're doing that in multiple steps. When you see that these two big chunks of code are the same in that they call HTTP create server. But this one here is being given a callback function. And what does this callback function say? It says hello world, right? Specifically, any time that somebody makes a request to the server, this function is going to get triggered. Any request. As soon as somebody makes a request to the server, that function. Right? Where this function says, hey, here is the request that came in. Right? So we're going to start writing this request. And here is the response that we're going to be sending out. Right? That's the syntax that the HTTP create server people have picked. I'm going to delete this code here, and we're going to write that from scratch. So HTTP create server receives a function. You could write it as a function like this, or I'm going to do it as an arrow function. I just like arrow functions, but there's no difference. And at any point, if I'm using syntax that confuses you, just stop me, and I'll explain it, or I'll switch to syntax that's more familiar. So what we'll get to say is hey, here's the request, and here's the response. And right now, all I'm going to do is I'm going to go console log ping. This is anytime I receive a request, I'm just going to console log ping. My server has restarted now. It says, Ayo, I'm listening on 3000. And what I want us to see is that if I go to localhost 3000, and if I was to refresh this page, it makes a request, and I spammed the refresh button. I spammed Command R. So now I got ping, 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 ping. Got a bunch of pings. That's good. We have requests coming in. Ideally, I want to handle that request and do something with it. Okay. Here's something I can do. I have access to this response thing. Okay. So the callback is going to be receiving a response object. And response has some useful stuff in here. I recommend that you press dot, and you scroll through here and take a look at the documentation. Like, what does response.destroy mean? Okay, it doesn't tell me, but maybe I'd go look it up. Some of these are going to have more in-depth documentation than others. But one of the things that I have is a function called response.end. And what response.end lets me do is I get to write some text in here. Response.end, woo. And what I'm going to find is any request that I make to my server now, it gets a response. Right? Every request that I make gets a response that says, woo. Sorry, I'm so into metal now, like I just immediately, my hands can't go up without forming horns. Like, oh man. I think everybody deserves to go to an Amon Amarth show. So every request is going to get the response, woo. Everyone, right? And we can test this. I can open up Postman. Have you seen Postman before? Have you seen curl before? How many of you like curl? Curl, exactly. Fabio? Yeah, curl is hot trash. What? Curl is garbage. It is so bad. Curl is just so hard to use because it doesn't feel very user-friendly. Postman is like a pretty version of curl. Postman has a GUI to it. So I can go to it and I can say, hey, you know what? When I make a GET request to localhost 3000, we're going to send, and then I get my response back. And what's nice about Postman as opposed to curl is that if I wanted to pick one of the other ones, I can make a post request to localhost 3000, and I get back the response over here. Right, so we're going to be playing around with Postman a little bit. Right. Postman's free. Postman. Just download it, check it out. So every single request that goes in right now is getting a response of woo. I can also set status code. Response.status code. In response.status code, I get to say stuff like 200, right? Or we'll do 418, so that's just a special one. And I'm going to see that when I make a request here, so we'll do a GET request to localhost 3000, send. I'm going to see that the status code that came back is 418, I'm a teapot. Hey. Did you know about 418? It's a real status code. It's a real status code in the, you do HTTP 418. 418, I'm a teapot. The HTTP 418 I'm a teapot client error response code indicates that the server refuses to brew coffee because it is a teapot. Obviously, that makes a ton of sense. It's a April Fool's joke protocol that actually made its way into the standard HTTP protocol, which is kind of funny. So I can send back status codes. I can change this to status code. I'm going to pick my own. Status code 75309. I don't know. When I make a request right now, I might end up seeing that as the status code response. Oh, okay. Maybe 75309, and I can check the server here. Apparently 75309 is an invalid status code. Right? So I might have to pick correct ones. So we'll change this back to 418. So right now what I have is when somebody makes a request, they get a response. No matter what, they get a response. Now, within this callback, I am using the response object. Correct? I'm using the response object. What else do I have access to at the moment? I have access to the request object. Right? So the request object's going to have all the things about the request. Who made the request? What URL is the request being made to? Right? What method is the request being made with? Right? All kinds of information that's packed into the request. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to go console.log request. Okay. I'm going to make my request, whether it's with Postman or with the browser, it doesn't really make a difference. Your browser, by default, only makes GET requests. In the URL, it only makes GET requests. There's going to be other ways to make different requests, but right now, only GET. So I've thrown that console log in, and I want us to see that when I threw that console log in, that's what I get. This incoming message. This is a gigantic object. Gigantic object. So much stuff. I can look through it. And honestly, there's way more than I might feel I even need, to be honest. Yeah, way more than I might need. But there's some stuff in here that's actually particularly useful. Right? I'll say that the three main things, we'll say four. The four main things that make up a request are going to be this. We'll say anatomy of an HTTP request. An HTTP request is made up of, actually, I'll get you to kind of do some of this work. What is in an HTTP request? The URL that I'm making the request to, that's part of it. What else? The verb, right? Post, put, get, that's another part of it. What else? maybe some data, right? That's really important. Maybe some data, right? Because if I'm creating something, if I'm saying create a new dog or create a new whatever, I need to say this is the data that I want you to create that thing with, right? So is every request going to have some data? Maybe not. But there is potentially some data depending on the request. And then there's another spot for extra stuff, right? Extra stuff. And that extra stuff, literally any extra stuff. You're going to be spending a bit of time on this extra stuff later on. I think Wednesday is when you're going to be doing this. Yeah, Wednesday. So I'm not going to say too much about this other than I'm going to use some words for this stuff. I'm going to say that the path is going to be the URL. The method is going to be that verb. The body is going to be that data that you want to pass in. And then this extra stuff is generally called headers. Right? That's the general structure of a request. Path, method, body, and headers. You can have as many headers as you want. Right? And again, you'll explore that stuff on Wednesday. Meaning, though, that right now in my server, what I can do is I can check maybe. Oh man, okay. So in the HTTP module, the path, they call it the URL. Doesn't really make a difference, right? Well, we'll say path/URL is going to be the URL. If I was to console.log the request URL, which is in that object, if I was to go look for it, every time I make a request, so we'll just refresh a bunch. Every time I make a request, what I get in here is the particular URL. What URL is this? Well, it's the root URL. I'm making a request to just the main page. But if I was to add stuff on here, like Thor, right? I'm not making a request to slash anymore. I'm making a request to /Thor. That's the URL. And what I see here is my request was to /Thor. That is fundamentally different than slash. And it's also fundamentally different than Odin, right? Two different requests, Thor and Odin. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to say, hey, you know what? Request URL is a value. And I can do things like if request.url is /Thor, then I want to do something special. Maybe what I want to do, and I'm gonna say that the response status code is always 418. Then maybe what I'll want to do when the request URL is Thor is I want to say Thor, right? Odin's son. And maybe if the request URL is we'll do /Freya, right? Then I might response.end I don't know, Freya, Odin's daughter, or however that works, right? Did I get that right? Is Freya Odin's daughter? Odin's wife? Ah, snap. Oh, you know what? It's Freydis. Freydis, who is Eric's daughter. Yeah, I've been spending quite a bit of time. So Freya. So else if the request URL is Freya, then I want to response with that. And we'll just say else, we'll response.end, I don't know, yar. Now they're pirates, apparently. So what I have here is a bit of logic that's actually tied to the request itself. And that becomes really interesting to me, right? I have actual logic on the server side. I can trigger whatever functions I want. And then I can also decide to return whatever I want depending on the request. So when I go Thor, I get Thor. When I go Freya, I got Freya. And then when I get something else, I just go yar. And I think this is, what's that? It's pretty cool. Like, this is madness. You can do anything, right? But I'm not even kidding. Like, you can make any website now, right? Because I can send back any data I want. I could go here, and let me really blow your mind. Let's say instead of Thor on its own like this, I go h1 Thor h1, right? Do that. Let me go back here. Let me go to Thor. Thor! What? Thor! That's nuts. You can send back rich text. Crazy. Right? You want to put images in here? Here we go. We'll go look up a picture of Thor. We don't want Marvel Thor. Get out of here. Show me the real Thor. Right? That's what I want to see. No, yes. This is the real Thor. So I've got the real Thor here. Open image new tab. We'll take that URL, right? Thor, and then I'm going to throw in image source. Here's some data. Let me end that image, right? And when I refresh this page here, get absolutely torqued. Thor, what? Amazing, right? Any website, anything you want. Right? Right now, I'm sending back static text, right? Or I can send back HTML. But I could send back other kinds of data too. And now, in the same way that I made this if on the request URL, can I just say that like you could also make an if on the request.method? Like, will you just accept that? If I show you that console.log request.method is a thing as well, right? So that's going to be put, get, post. So I could make some if-elses for that stuff as well. Okay? And that's a place where you sit down and you say, okay, well, what does my website do? Right? And what situations do I need to account for? Right? Okay, well, I need to account for a get to /Thor. I need to account for a post to /gods. Right? I need to account for a delete to /monsters or whatever. Right? Like, maybe those are all things I need to account for, and I can write a bunch of if, else if, else if, else if, else if statements to account for that. Right? If the request is to Thor and the request.method is get. But maybe if, let's just do that here. So this is going to be else if the request URL is to Thor and the request method is delete. Then the response is, I don't know, something like an h1 with the style being color red that says, no one deletes Thor. Right? No one deletes Thor. And then you go h1. Now what I have is some functionality that's actually specific onto the method itself. Right? You're right, I didn't close that. Good call. So now when I go on Thor, this is fine. But if I use postman to, oh no, am I trying to delete Thor? What I get back is, I get no one deletes Thor. Right? So this is dependent on both the method and the URL. And I'm just going to say that there's all kinds of data that you can send back. By default, that data is going to be text. Your browser might interpret that text as HTML if you send back HTML stuff. But I could also send back images. I could send back files. I could send back all kinds of stuff. Right? I'm not going to spend any time on that, right, other than to say you can. Right? But I do want to end this first half by making us really look at this, right, and think. If I've said that you can make any website with this, anything you want, you can make this pattern in this tool, right? What problems do you see? Is it true? Like, can you actually make any website with this? Why not? That's not a good answer, right? So for Victoria, Anthony said no, and then when pressed on the stand, he said, I don't know. No, really, like let's really think about this. Can we make any website we want with this? Yes, okay, sure. Fabio, what's the problem with this, though? It's got a ton of if-else statements. This feels like a nightmare. I can make any website I want with this, but I won't want to, right? This is a lot, because for every single situation of requests, right, I need to make a different if-else, and my code gets more and more and more confusing. Also, look at this. Whenever I need to make an HTML page, I have to write it as a string? Get out of here. We're Vikings, right? Like, we don't use, what? If I want to send back some nice runes, I got to write it in a response.end? No, right? So there's got to be a better way. This is totally doable, but there's got to be a better way. And that's what we're going to be taking a look at in the second half of the lecture. Okay. Again, to close this, you're not writing any of this code as a developer. If this stuff feels terrible, it's because it is, right? So don't spend too much time kind of thinking about this. Are there any questions before we call a break? We'll wait for Victoria as well. Victoria, if you have no questions, can you just say no? Oh, Caitlin says no. Awesome. Perfect. So what we're going to do is we're going to let's take a, treat yourself, 12-minute break. Yeah, 12-minute break. At 11:22, we'll be picking up, and we'll dive right back into it. Okay. All right. Yo, what's up? Welcome back. Sweet. Terrence says we're online. Beautiful. Victoria, I figured you might like some fish. Just a nice little fish tank. Soothing. What's very interesting is the internet is filled with all kinds of... Did you know this? There's just strange videos online. Did you know that? So weird. Next, you're going to tell me people just go online and tell lies. Like, what? But there are a lot of these, like, beautiful bumblebees. Check this out. It is 3 hours of bumblebee videos. The view count is going to be something insane. Oh, 45,000. This one's pretty low. But yeah, just a bunch of bees. I don't know if anybody here doesn't like insects, so I'm just going to go away from that real quick. But I really like, if you look up dog videos, you'll find like videos of dogs, and then you'll also find videos for dogs. And the videos for dogs have like 3 million views. And you just put them on, and it's just birds. Oh, it's so sweet. And Caitlin put in there's a video of Caitlin put in a video of a fish chasing a laser pointer. It's just so cute. So yeah, if I don't know if sometimes you just need to zone out for a little while. There's a ton of TV for dogs, which is great. So back to what really matters. We'll be working on our Thor and Norse god themed website today. Oh yeah, did I mention at the beginning, like when I first introduced them on Marth, that they're Viking themed metal? Okay, I showed Charlotte how many sword fights have you seen on stage at a concert? Because I saw 3. Yeah, there's sword fights. They come out and just started hitting each other. They were wearing like armor, and it was crazy. It was nuts. And then they brought out like a giant. If I look up Twilight of the Thunder God, and again, this is because this is going to be a website about this. If you look up Twilight of the Thunder God live, get absolutely hyped because they have a giant serpent. Where'd it go? Where'd the serpent go? Oh, dude, just show me the serpent. There it is. You see it? Oh, god damn. There you go. Go on. There we go. The gigantic serpent. And it is honestly sort of massive and terrifying. Point is, I think I'm going to quit my job and become a metal musician. Anyone want to start a band? Yeah, there you go. Let's do it. So back to the code. We're not going to go over time today. We're not. We're going to end right at noon. Okay? 33 minutes. We got this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the tool that you'll be using today and onwards, right, to build servers. I really want to stress that this is not a tutorial on how to use this thing. Right? What we're going to see is just how the mindset of building websites using this new tool is going to be fairly similar, but with a slight twist to what we did in the first half. Right? And I'm going to introduce some kind of new ideas. Right? This will all be recorded, so even if I move through sort of quickly, right, you'll have the video immediately. I'll give you the video as soon as it's processed. And so the thing that we're going to be working with is Express. Right? I'm going to make a new folder called Express Demo. And we'll be working in here. Now, Express is a thing that we're going to use to make servers. So I'm going to need a server file. Yo, Chai. Sorry, it's, yeah. So I'm going to have a server.js file. And what I'm going to write inside of the server.js file is I'm going to start using Express. Right? I'm going to write some code, and then I'll explain it. Const Express equals
require dots, and then just require express. And as soon as I run this, so let me stop the server from before. Let me go into the Express demo. As soon as I run node server.js, or if I was running nodebon server.js, something happens. Specifically, I got an error. What is the error? I can't find the module Express. This is good, right? Because I didn't install Express. It doesn't come by default with Node. Notice that that HTTP module that I made comes by default, right? But Express is going to be something that somebody else has made that I have to install. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say I want to install Express. How do you think I might do that? I might npm install it, but I need to have my npm project initialized first. So there's an npm init. Right? Do you know what npm init-y does? It just does all the default values. Right? So here I go, and I've got all the default values, and I have a package JSON that's been created for me. Right? And then I can go npm install express, and this is just going to run and install, and it's going to be happy. Right? Now I'm going to go node server.js, and I'm going to notice that nothing happens. This is good. Right? Very, very similarly to what I had to write before and what we brainstormed, I am going to need to say something to the tune of create a server and then listen. Right? I'm going to need to say both those things. The syntax for express is going to be const app equals express. Do I need to call this app? No, I could call this anything. Right? But I need to save it. So I might go app or server or whatever. The reason I'm going to say app is because when you go look online, a lot of examples use the word app instead of server, so I just don't want you to get confused. Or I don't want you to have to like rename the things that you copy and paste into the stuff. Right? But again, you can name this whatever you want. I'm going to name it app. So I make my server. I see that, again, nothing happens. But then I say app.listen. And very, very similarly to the create server that I did before, I can pass it a port, and I can also pass it a callback. So console.log, hello, I am listening on 3000. And that's, whoops. This is very much all I need to have a server that's listening on 3000. Right? And so far, this looks pretty much identical to what we did in the first half. Right? And when I go to localhost 3000, what do I expect should happen when I make this request? You looked at it was like on the tip of your tongue. What happened last time? It'll just wait and load. Excellent. Very, very good thought. Absolutely wrong. I can't believe it. I don't get it. I give you crumbs. Try this whole Socratic method. I can't believe it. How could you not say no? So it's a slight surprise, right? Because instead of just loading, I get cannot get slash, which is weird. Because I did not write any code in here. A command F, cannot. The word cannot is nowhere in here. So what does that tell me? There's fancier error messages. There's fancier stuff happening within Express. I have said that HTTP works by making a request and getting back a response. Right? Do I have code in here that says send back a response? No. But if I look in the network tool, right, so we're going to go into the network, like hackers. Whoa. There you go. I'm going to refresh this page. And I see that localhost, right, when I made a GET request to localhost 3000, I got back a 404 not found. Right? That tells me that by default, Express sends back a 404. By default. Right? And that's going to be crucial in understanding how Express works. That Express is going to, by default, send something back. Now, there is going to be a concept called middleware, right, that I am going to gloss over today. Right? As in, I will talk about it lightly, but I'm telling you that there's sort of deeper knowledge to see about middleware that you will explore tomorrow and the day after. Right? So this may feel like a slightly incomplete lecture. I'm going to tease this idea that express by default, if I was to go, I'm just going to draw a thing so that all of you can see. Express by default has what I'm going to call something like a pipeline. It has a pipeline through which requests get processed. So we said that requests go in. So this is R, E, Q. And over on the outside, right, a response gets. Response happens. So stuff goes in and stuff goes out. We had to, with the HTTP create server stuff, we had to do that ourselves. We had to say send back a response. Express already has a bit of a pipeline, and anything that goes in is going to come out by default with a 404, right? By default. But what we have access to is we're going to have access to putting something somewhere in the middle here and catching stuff. Right? We're going to have access to saying, oh, hold on a minute. This kind of request, I want you to do this with it instead. Right? So I might be able to catch a request for get/Thor and do something special with it and send back a special response. But every other request might go. So I'm going to go ahead with this analogy of slotting stuff in the middle of this pipeline. Okay? Where I'm basically putting in extra things. And again, I want to say that this is going to feel incomplete, right? But I want you to think about it for the next day or two as you're coding this stuff up, about this pre-existing pipeline. I'm going to write some code now that actually puts something in there. app.use. So app.use is a function that I get to call to say anytime there is a request, this is what you should do. Does that feel familiar? We did that earlier, except before that was passed directly into here. Right? So app.use, this takes a request and a response. I'm going to start saying REQ and RES instead of request and response just because it keeps the code shorter. I might recommend that you write out actual like request and response so that you don't make typos if you want to try that. So I can console.log any request that comes through. So here is any request. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to start using this with NodeMon just so that my server is constantly running. And we're going to see that the code is going to be very similar to what we had in the first half. But then I'm going to make a little change to it. So here's my request to localhost 3000. I made a request. It is now hanging, right? It is now hanging because I caught it with this function here. And this function here does not say, right? This does not say to send back a 404. All it does is it's hijacked the default behavior and then just held it. Right? So what I get is it just hangs. But I did put this console.log REQ, so if I look in here, I will find the request. Right? And the request is going to be very, very similar to what we had before, like request.body. Oh, sorry, URL is in here, and request.method is in here. Right? So if I wanted to, I actually could take all of the code that I wrote earlier, and I could put that in here. That I could say, OK, app.use, and then if, let me just rename this to request and response. If the request URL is this and the request is method whatever, nothing has changed. The only slight syntactical change is going to be that instead of saying end, with express, I say send. Right? But we're going to see right off the bat that my server now goes back to working the way it used to. But I said that I wanted a different way of doing this. Right? It feels weird that I've introduced a tool to write just the exact same code. Right? What Express does is it gives us some helpers to define all these possible routes. Right? It gives us some helpers to define the way that our server is going to have its endpoints. Right? I'm going to use the words routes and endpoints, right, interchangeably. They basically mean all the places to which you can make HTTP requests. For example, at the moment, one of the endpoints is a get request to /Thor. And another one of the endpoints is a delete request to /Thor, right? Or a any request to /Freya. Those are endpoints that I've declared. So what I want us to do is take a look at this and also take a look at the code that we had brainstormed right off the bat. This was the code that we came up with when I had us come up with what we would want a server to look like. What is the main difference between this and something like this? Right, what's the main kind of structural difference there? Yes. Right, so here, on the right-hand side, our brainstorm thing, this was to register a certain request. We were registering a certain endpoint. When somebody makes a get request to main, and it's got this nice syntax to it, right? I like this a lot more than having to write a billion if-else statements, right? Because the else-if statements become really hard to read, whereas this becomes just one thing. It's one call that says, on a get request to /main. And this is what Express is actually going to give us. It's going to give us the ability to write code like this. And I'm going to be able to take this stuff here, and I'll be able to write it such that I say something like app.get, so when you make a get request, to /Thor. So when you make a get request to /Thor, then this is what you do. And so I'm writing it in that way that, again, we'd come up with, right? Which I think is really neat, because it seems to be intuitive to people to have to register particular events. Right? So I'm going to comment out this old stuff, because it's going to interfere with what we actually want to write. And I'll be able to say in here, OK, when you make a get request to /Thor, I'm going to send back just the word Thor at the moment, right? Just to make sure that this works. So I go here right now, and when I make a get request to /Freya, do I have a registered endpoint for Freya? I don't. So I get back the 404, which is nice. Right? I got back that default action. But when I make a get request to Thor, now I get Thor, because I registered that endpoint. And so what we have here with Express is it's taken that very kind of clunky code that we had to write, and it's given us a much smaller, kind of briefer way of having to write the same functionality. Right? So for every new situation that I want to make, app.get Freya, right, I get to go request, response, and in here res.send Freya. And then our code becomes a little bit easier to read. So it's kind of funny because in 6 lines, we've kind of ended up with what we spent quite a bit of time working up. And Express is going to give us quite a bit more flexibility and just power to add functionality to our website. Making a website, like an entire fully fledged website out of Express, is not going to be as painful as using the create server stuff. So I'll show you one example of this. I'm going to change our routes a little bit. I'm going to say something like, I have an object called gods, right? And one of those gods is Thor. Right? Name, Thor Odinson. Right? Profession, protector of mankind. And then we'll just say skills, thunder, and lightning. This is Thor's LinkedIn page. And then I'll add in Freya as well. So Freya, name is Freya. Profession, actually don't know very much about Freya, so we'll just steal something real quick. Freya, goddess associated with war, death, and love. Okay, nice. So goddess associated with war, death, and love. Skills, does Freya have powers? Maybe not. Well, we'll see. Oh yeah, she does. She has a cloak of falcon feathers. There you go. And she's the owner of the necklace Brisingamen. We'll just do that. Wait, what? Rides a chariot pulled by 2 cats. That's actually what we're going to do instead. So skills, rides a chariot pulled by 2 cats. So I have these 2 things that exist in an object called gods. And what I want to do is maybe show the correct information depending on the god that we're talking about. So let me start off by just doing Thor, just Thor on its own. Let's say, okay, when somebody makes a GET request to /Thor, what I want to send back is this entire object. Okay. Within this code here, if I wanted to take that object, how would I get that object? What's that? Gods? And then gods.thor. Right, so here's Thor is gods.thor. And if I wanted to send that object back, right, I might try something like res.send Thor. And we could see what this does. So here's my server listening. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make my request. So here's the request to Thor. I'm going to find that by default, it sent back the object. Right? It sent back a JSON object. And do you know what JSON is at this point? You dealt with JSON last week. And JavaScript object notation. Right? So now I'm able to send back some data. Right? Some servers will send back data to their clients. The clients will be like, hey, can I have this? And they'll just send back like JSON data. Other servers are going to send back HTML pages. Okay? We're going to be working this week with servers that send back HTML pages. Okay? But next week, you'll be working on sending back data. So what I want to do is I don't just want to send back Thor on its own. I want to send back a page that represents Thor. So something that I could do is I could go const page equals, and then maybe I'm using backticks just so that I can make a string on multiple lines. But what I might do is here's a div, and here's an h1 that says the name. So here's Thor. Right? I'm realizing that like I have that data in here, so I could go God or yeah, we'll just do Thor.name. Thor.name, and I could add some other stuff in here too, like an h2 that says Thor.profession, and also Thor.skills. And now I've got a stew going. This is good. I got stuff coming up. And I might decide to send back, instead of sending back Thor, I send back the page about Thor. And now what I'll see is when I refresh this, what I get back is, hey, I'm Thor Odinson. You may know me from being the protector of mankind. Some of my skills are thunder and lightning. Just, there we go. And I might want this to also work with Freya. So I could make another route. Here's Freya, and I could change all of this to Freya. Okay. And now I have two routes, one that works with Thor and one that works with Freya. Oh, whoops. Huh. Oh, I didn't save, that's what. So as soon as I save, whoop, there you go. Hey, I'm Freya. You may know me from being associated with war, death, and love. Quirky fact about me is I ride a chariot pulled by two cats. So here's some information, right? And I have these two different routes to have that stuff. What do I notice, though, immediately as soon as I look at this stuff? Right? As a developer, what starts bubbling up within you? You have a feeling. I see it on your face. You're like, what? What is it? What is it? You're repeating yourself. We don't want to repeat ourselves. Programmers are succinct, right? We don't want to repeat ourselves. As soon as you see repetition, what do we want to do? How do we fix repetition? We might create a function. And why is that? How does a function allow us to get rid of repetition? What's that? There we go. Oh, whoops. Oh. Sorry about that, Victoria. The mic fell off. I hope that wasn't too loud. But yes, name? Logan says, if we have a function, we can reference it with the variables that we need. The specific thing that I'm looking for is that last part. Reference something with the particular variables that we want to fill in that stuff with. Right? To get rid of that repetition, we can use parameterization. Right? Pass in parameters. Let me just blow your mind. Just absolutely. You take this thing, and you get to say that, whoops, I immediately hit it. You get to say that that's going to be a parameter. Right? Colon is going to say that particular part of the URL, that's a placeholder. Right? This is going to be the name of the god. All right, we'll go, this is the god name. Right? And now what I get to do is I can get the particular god, right, by going gods and using that god name here. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to change this. How do I get this particular thing here, the god name, or the parameter in the URL? Well, with Express, what they've chosen is that you go rec.params. And then the thing. That's just what the Express people have chosen, is that if you declare some parameters up here, you can go rec.params. And get the thing. What I'm going to find now is I have a dynamic route. I have a route that decides what to show me based on the value that I pass in. So if I do Thor, that's what I get. If I do Freya, that's what I get instead. And I've been able to declare that with one dynamic route. That is one of the big massive things that Express gives us in terms of useful functionality, is these dynamic routes. And you can make any part of a URL dynamic, any part of it. And so if I was to have a longer kind of URL, such as get godname /skills, right? Maybe this is a page that just shows only the skills for that particular god, right? Here we go. I can receive a particular god name and then show the particular skills for it. And notice that when I look at this, I imagine this as being, okay, well, this could be Thor/skills. It can also be, I'm just going to say /Thor. It could also be /Freya/skills. Because that's the parameter here. So when I try that out here, /Freya/skills, what I get is just Freya's skills, whereas this is just Thor's skills. Neat? Yep.
So when you go /skills, is that the equivalent to going like dot this part of that object?
That's a great question. For Victoria, the question was, when I go /skills, is that the equivalent of me going dot and then part of the object? That's a great kind of like philosophical question, because a URL doesn't really have any meaning embedded into it. Any URL is valid. Like I can go /Thor/sk/ills/ all that is, like, each of those is a valid URL. What you can do is, as a community decide, maybe every time I go /, it goes deeper into this idea of a resource, right? And what you're looking at there is, how do we come up with routes, right? How do we come up with the particular routes that we want to have, right? That's actually something you're going to be spending tomorrow on. My short answer to that is going to be yes. You can think of the slashes in a URL as taking you deeper within an object, right? But that's just one way that you can choose to define URLs. Notice I could, by all means, go, god name /skills. What it should return is just a big H1 that says brah. Like, that's all it does, right? And this is totally legal, right? Like, that's absolutely fine. When I go Thor/skills, it's just ad-libs, because it does come down to the way that you decide to design the stuff. Right? Is that a satisfying answer to that? Right? So again, it can make sense to use these slashes as like going deeper into an object. But you're going to find that this is actually quite a bigger conversation than it might seem at first. So 11:56, we got 4 minutes. I'm going to show you one last thing. You're going to find that like writing out entire HTML pages like this, right, just as strings, comes quite a bit of work. Right? There's just a lot that goes into that, especially as your pages get bigger, especially as your pages get some styling. Right? If I had a bunch of CSS, or if I had a bunch of JavaScript that needed to be embedded into that page, all kinds of stuff. These HTML pages, if you go look at it like a real website, so here is a, I don't know, we'll go to Freya's Wikipedia page. When I go inspect and I see, or you know what, we'll just do view source. Here is the page source for the Freya article. And it doesn't make sense for me to have all of this written as a string, right? Because that's a lot. It just doesn't make sense to have all of that. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to make our pages in a separate file, and we'll be able to tell Express to send that page. Cool? Okay, so I'm going to do this in sort of 3 steps. The first step for me is that I'm going to need to bring in what's called a view engine, right? For what I'm going to be doing today, I'm going to be using a special plugin that we can use to send files. Right? This particular plugin is called a view engine, right? And we're going to use a specific view engine called EJS. It's not the only one, but it's the one that you're using in Bootcamp. Right? It's not the only one. So EJS lets us do quite a bit of like custom stuff, and I'll show you part of it. I'm going to show you how I install it first. I'm going to go npm install EJS. Okay. So your assignments are going to take you through these instructions. I'm going to install EJS because I need to get it from the internet. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to say that my app is going to use the it's going to use the view engine of EJS. I hate this code. I hate this code because it's really confusing. It's not something I can scaffold you up to. But understand that this is going to be some configuration code. Right? This is just going to tell the app, it's going to tell our Express app to use EJS, whatever that is. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to restart my server. So once my server is up and running, I'm going to actually make a route. So we'll say that this one's the old route. So you're going to have to go /Thor/old to get our old HTML page. But I'm going to make a new, like I'm going to rename this old route here, or keep that name. And in here is where I'm going to do the magic EJS stuff. Does that sound OK? So if I was to go to /Freya/old, that's where I see the old stuff that we did. Right? But when I go /Freya, that's where I'm going to do the EJS stuff that I haven't coded up yet. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say something like res dot, and now I have a function called render. And I'm going to say render the particular page that I want to load up. Maybe I want to load, we'll do this actually in 2 steps here. You can comment this one out. We're going to start off with just a default / page. I want to render the main page. Right? Main page. I don't have a main page yet. But I'm saying when you make a GET request to /, I want you to show the main page. And what I'm going to see is when I go to /, I get a pretty useful error. It might seem freaky at first, but what it tells me is I can't find the view main inside of this particular folder. And I could go look at the folder it's looking for. Okay. So it's trying to render a view. And a view is going to be a particular page. Okay. It's trying to render a view, and specifically where it looks for your view. And again, your assignments are going to take you through this. You're going to have a folder called views. And inside of that folder called views, you need to have a file called whatever you're saying here. So mine's going to be called main. And since we're using the EJS template engine, view engine, I'm going to go main.ejs. And again, I know that that feels like a couple new steps that don't feel like they've been scaffolded out properly. But this is configuration. Right? There's a certain set of code that we're going to call boilerplate code. And boilerplate code is configuration code that's just needed to get stuff to work. What I'm going to find here, though, now is I have a main.ejs file. So when I go ahead and I refresh my page, there is nothing there because there's nothing written on my main.ejs page. Let me put an h1 in here that says main page. Here is my main page. So now I can take this idea of having a main page, and maybe I might have a Norse god page. And my Norse god page, it might say something like, and I could steal the code that I'd written earlier, which was this page here. So my Norse god page is going to say, hey, I'm Freya. And, there was something about death. And just a really death, war, and love. And then my skills were that cat chariot. Right? So I could hard code this up. And I can say in my server, hey, you know what? When you make a request to the particular god name, I want you to render the Norse god page. So now, regardless of what god I put in, so if I go Freya, I get the Freya page. But if I do Thor, I get the Freya page again. I don't get the Thor page. So the last thing we're going to do is we're going to hook this up so that my EJS page actually shows me the data that I want to see. Right? This is going to feel really weird. You're going to be working through this in multiple assignments. I want you to, like, more than anything, spend some time today thinking about how this works. Right? I want to get the particular God into this page here. What should the syntax for that maybe involve? How would the render function know what to put inside of the Norse God page? Let's see, what do functions in general know about? They know about the parameters that you pass in, right? Functions will only know about either global stuff or the parameters that you pass in. In general, most functions are not going to be using global stuff because it's hard to code up a function to use global things properly. Right? Functions will generally only care about the things that you pass in. They'll only know about the things that you pass in. So I need to pass in the particular God in here. Right? This isn't real code, the ... but I need to pass in the particular God in there. So with EJS, what we're going to do is we're going to make a template variable object. You can call this anything you want, but by default, usually people will call it template vars. Right? And they'll say something like, okay, particular God is, here we go. So I put in any variables that are kind of interesting. I put them into an object. And then I can take that object and I can actually pass it in. I can actually pass it into my render function. Right? And now hold on to your seats. This is the last big kind of whoa of the lecture, which is when I go over to my Norse God EJS page, I can replace my hard-coded stuff with particular God dot name. Right? This syntax seems horrific. This is not HTML. This is EJS. It's called a templating language because I get to create templates. And this is a template that, depending on the particular God name, will show you the name. And now what I'm going to see is, if I put in Freya, I get Freya. But if I put in Thor, I got Thor Odinson. Right? I will fully accept that this is kind of horrific code to look at. But you need to sort of just accept the format of the template that they've chosen, which is you make an object on this side, you pass it in, and then over on the other side, you get to say the values that you want to use. Right? So I can do this for particular God.profession. And I get to do the same thing for particular God.skills. Right? And now I've made a dynamic page. I've used a template to make myself dynamic pages. Cool. So it's 12:07. I lied. I went over by a couple minutes. I'm sorry. Please don't hate me. I figured this was kind of important for you to see. You can make anything now, right? Pretty much anything. At the end of TinyApp, I really want you to take the lessons that you've learned in TinyApp, go on the internet, go to the websites that you use, and think about how you might make them. Because you'll be able to make them at the end of this week. Okay? You'll be able to make YouTube. With this right now, you're actually pretty much able to make Wikipedia. Because Wikipedia has a template to it, and the data just switches around. Right? So I just think that it's like, this is a pretty empowering week. Like I said, you're going to go through TinyApp. It's going to be terrible. Right? I'm going to be upfront about that. It's going to be hard. Right? But at the end of it, take a look at the stuff that you've learned and the stuff you've done, and then take a look at the websites that are out there. Right? and start seeing that you're going to be able to create that stuff. You just have to sit down and just kind of do it. And, I will be sending out notes very, very soon. The video is going to be sent out as soon as it's finished processing, which can take like 4 or 5 minutes. I know we covered a lot of stuff today. Like I said, this lecture, or any of the lectures, are not tutorials, right? They introduce you to the thing, and then you'll be able to do the stuff through the assignments. Right? Before I do let you go, though, are there any questions? Is there anything that you feel nervous about? All right, yeah, true Vikings. That's awesome. Cool. So go in berserk and just have a good time. Do message me if you have any questions, though. Does Davey have a thing?
Yeah.
Is it for Victoria as well?
Sort of. They're having their town hall with Caroline.
Okay, cool. So Victoria, I'll close this. Have a great day.